In today's podcast, I'm going to address the lies that are told against Brother Branham and the message. This will be a multi-part series and will need continued study and prayer from you on this. I'm going to start looking at the Prescott Trailer Park Charge, and I'm going to start also look at the charge that Brother Branham was a Pentecostal and not a Baptist to start with. Thank you so much for tuning in. God bless you. Greetings. Thank you for tuning in to listen to Equipping the Bride podcast. I'm Brother Jason DeMars from Beaufort, South Carolina, a minister at Bethel Tabernacle. New episodes of this podcast are posted every Friday. You can watch this podcast on YouTube and listen to it on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify. If you have any questions, testimonies, or prayer requests, please let me know at jasondemars.com. I also have free books and tracts available at my website, and shipping is free as well. May the Lord richly bless you. All right, welcome everyone. God bless you. I am back home for a few days after the missions trip that I had to the Middle East. Went to Egypt and had a conference there and held several services. I think we had 7 services held in Egypt, and also went to Israel and held several services there, and went to discover and study different sites there. It was a tremendous blessing. My wife met me in Israel. She was with me there, and we get a chance to see and study quite a number of biblical sites, archaeological sites, and go to the Israel Museum and see the history of the Bible. They're just absolutely incredible. Got to see the Dead Sea Scrolls in the Shrine of the Book, and also spend some time in Galilee, Sea of Galilee. Got to see Mount Carmel. Got to see spend an extensive amount of time in Jerusalem, and wonderful fellowship there with the folks that traveled with me, and also a wonderful fellowship with the saints there, believers who is a church made up of Jews and Gentiles. So very, very thankful to experience that, be a part of that. Wonderful services both in Egypt, and the ministry of the word was very, very well received, and the Holy Spirit moved in a mighty way. So thank you for your prayers. We're back for a few days, then off to Hagerstown, Indiana, to minister for a church there this coming Sunday, Wednesday, Sunday, and then I'll be up visiting family in Minnesota. So prayers for us for traveling mercies. Just want to remind everyone, if you want to help out our podcast, please review it on Apple Podcasts. Please, if you're listening on Facebook, please like, comment, and share it on Facebook. If you're listening on YouTube, please subscribe and hit the little like button, and also comment on it. This all helps the algorithms and spreads the message around the world. Also, if you wish to support this work that is going around the world, you can do so on the website at jasondemars.com, or if you want to do so on a monthly basis for $3, $5, $8, or $10, you can do that on Buzzsprout. The link will be somewhere here above or below the video. This podcast does go around the world and is reaching people worldwide for the message, as well as the free book ministry that we have. That is also going around the world, and people who are not message believers and don't know about the message yet are ordering the book, and it is going in places where none of us can really go, through the advertisement and through the search on YouTube. It's been a I've received a lot of feedback and been a great blessing to people, and lots of repeat orders and more books going out. So certainly appreciate that. Appreciate your prayers. We do our best to proclaim this message and get it out into as many hands as possible. Today, I want to start going in and addressing the lies that you see going out against the message that people have been deceived by. We want to provide a scriptural answer and a scriptural approach to this. So the first accusation that I want to address here is regarding the Prescott Trailer Park. Leo and Jean were helping Brother Branham with the tapes, recording his sermons as he went around and traveled with him. And at some point in time, they decided to go and start a little trailer park type of place for message believers to move to, and place for ministry to go forward there. And what ended up happening is both of them were very manipulative, controlling, and abusive towards the young people. There were criminal charges there filed, and many details about just horrendous, evil things, sexual perversion, and so forth that took place there at the hands of these men, and just very grievous and heartbreaking, really. What can you say? You just grieve over what happened, and you just have to say, pray the Lord brings healing and peace to the people that were affected and continue to be affected by that. But what people are saying, anti-message people are saying, is that Brother Branham should have known about it and done something about it. In other words, they say if he was a prophet, he would have known about it and done something about it. They say the blame for it goes back to Brother Branham. Now, this is false. I want to show you that Brother Branham actually gives a very specific warning in one of the messages that he preaches there in Prescott, and it is even specifically about the children. But furthermore, the charge that he's in error is circular reasoning and very illogical. All right, so this is in the sermon Power of Transformation, preached October 31st, 1965. Brother Branham says, now remember, don't forget this, Brother Leo and Jean especially. Now you think Satan is going to let this go on like this without a hindrance? Oh no, he sure won't. He's going to fly in one of these days just like a whirlwind. But when the enemy comes in like a flood, the Spirit of God raises a standard against it. Just keep lifting yourself up in prayer before God. Cling to one another, hold to God. For if you love one another, it shows you love God. This will all men know that you're my disciples when you have love one for the other. And I thought a while ago, what beautiful singing, what fine voices, what a fine group of men and women, husbands and wives, young, old, and middle-aged, sitting together here. I thought, well, they had to have it down in Prescott. They had to be down there and ought to have a little radio broadcast like that. Then you see that wouldn't be just exactly what God has called these young men to do. See, the bride is being called out. Called out. Now my work is out here to call. And then things like this. And when you colonize yourselves together and hold yourself where you want to bring up your children, each one watching each day like the eye of an eagle watching over their young, so that you won't, if you see anything wrong, then you call that person aside and pray over it and things like that. Keep it pure, holy, so the Holy Spirit can have a place to visit. All right, so here is a specific warning about watching over your children with an eagle eye, and if you see anything wrong, to confront the person that does the wrong. They did not take heed to this advice, and unfortunately, they received a horrible result, a heartbreaking result. But Brother Branham very specifically warned them. If they would have very specifically listened and heeded that warning, the whole disaster would have been avoided. Secondarily, I want to examine this. These people are following Brother Branham's ministry. They ask him to preach there. He visits them and preaches the message. Then, as time goes on, physical and sexual abuse takes place among the children. Now, this is not a scriptural approach to blame Brother Branham. Those that commit sin are responsible for that sin. And those who perpetuate and allow it are responsible for perpetuating it and allowing it. If you have uninvolved parents who are not paying attention, not involved in their children's lives, they bear a responsibility for not being involved. If you have preachers not warning and rebuking and turning the situation over to the police, you have deacons who know not turning it over to the police, they're responsible for that. Now, they're not responsible for the sexual sin, but they're responsible to God for not doing their part to fight against it. All right. Now, when you blame Brother Branham for this, you're doing several things. First, you assume that Brother Branham is a prophet, and then that he knew about the situation and did nothing. Second, you conclude since he did nothing about it, he must not be a prophet. This is circular reasoning, because when you conclude that he's not a prophet, then you in fact need to conclude that he didn't know about what was happening and therefore did nothing. Or you need to assume that Brother Branham was actually involved in the sin. There's no proof of that. You have no proof that he was involved at all. You do have proof of what happened. You do have proof that Brother Branham gave a warning. That's what we have proof of. That's what we have specific history of. Therefore, your conclusion that Brother Branham was at fault is nonsense. Okay? All right. So secondly, you have to understand that there are prophets in the Bible. So before I go forward with that, your first assumption leads to your second assumption, which invalidates the first assumption. It's illogical reasoning. It's nonsense. So secondarily, you have to understand there are prophets in the Bible who were involved in situations through the Bible where men committed heinous sins. We cannot hold those prophets accountable for the sins of those around them. Jesus oversaw Judas. We don't hold Jesus responsible for Judas' decision to betray him and then commit suicide. Isaiah was a relative of King Ahaz. King Ahaz offered his children to Molech. Well, Isaiah warned him. You can't blame Isaiah for what Ahaz did, his family member. Nathan was a prophet to David. David committed adultery and had Uriah killed. Again, you can't blame Nathan for what David did. David bears responsibility. Say, well, if Nathan would have preached better and held him accountable, then David wouldn't have done that. Nonsense. David did it. Nathan rebuked him. The list could go on. Just because horrible things happen doesn't mean it's the prophet or the pastor's or the minister's fault. Now, if they know about it and don't give warning, well, we have a problem. But Brother Branham gave warning. Brother Branham, as a prophet, warned the people of the dangers to their children, gave them specific advice of how to deal with it. Next thing was, Brother Branham was an associate of Jim Jones, and Jim Jones was in fact a message believer. Jim Jones is the one who brought all his people to, I think, Guyana in South America. And when the FBI was closing in on his abuses, he inspired them all to drink Kool-Aid laced with poison that killed them, and he drank it as well. So the charge is basically saying Brother Branham is a cult leader and inspired Jim Jones to do what he did. Now, documents are provided to show that Brother Branham participated in revivals, that Jim Jones was around or involved. We could go on and on about Brother Branham being involved in revivals where false teachers were involved, false prophets were involved, etc., etc. Brother Branham's job was to go out and preach the message and call a bride out. He went to places that many of us would not go to in order to do that. May God bless him. This is a reason to appreciate him and his ministry, that he would go into places that were difficult and harsh. Jim Jones was a Trinitarian, and Jim Jones loosely associated with the Assemblies of God, though towards the end he was removed from it. There's no proof that Jim Jones was ever associated with the Message of the Hour. Jim Jones considered himself an incarnation of God himself, and encouraged and allowed fornication and sinful practices. He was involved with drugs. People in his church were involved with drugs. Jim Jones was a false teacher. Jim Jones was evil. Brother Branham had zero association with him. The documents that John Collins and different ones are putting out there are at best loose associations. But again, Brother Branham is simply going out and preaching in places in order to proclaim the message and reach the lost. You go where God sends you. It doesn't mean you're associating with their doctrine. It doesn't mean that they're associating with your doctrine. It simply means they're holding meetings, and that's it. In questions and answer, look what Brother Branham says about people calling him the Messiah. This is 1964. But you see, that's got to following the meeting. Why does people call me the Messiah? What does they got? Well, one fellow out here showed me the other day, he had a little thing, and he was carrying on, wanted all the people to be baptized in my name. That'd make me an antichrist. But I'm not for those things, and all you people know that. Brother Branham was completely against this idea that he was the Messiah or that he was God. He didn't believe that he was virgin born, that people should be baptized in his name. He said it's an evil demonic spirit that would say that. Brother Branham was not involved with Jim Jones. Total nonsense. Another charge is that Brother Branham was a part of the KKK. This is an outright lie that he was a part of the KKK. Look what Brother Branham's attitude about Abraham Lincoln and slavery was. This is from 1961, Sermon Jehovah Jireh. I certainly believe that Abraham Lincoln was one of the greatest presidents we ever had by freeing the slave. God never intended any man to be a slave, nor his color or his creed, no matter what. He should never be a slave. God made man in his own image and his likeness. Man made slaves, not God. And they used to bring them slaves over and sell them, and you could buy them like you do a used car lot. Brokers would go by and buy them up. They'd go into the plantations and swap them, have a great big heavy-set man, and maybe his wife's a little spindly woman. Why they just buy a bigger woman, breed this big man to this woman to make bigger slaves like cattle. You mean that would please God? No, sir. No man can be a Christian and believe in slavery. What nonsense. They say this is true because Roy Davis was part of the KKK and was a religious charlatan and was maybe even the grand master of the KKK. So they say because of that association, Brother Branham was a part of it. And they use quotes and show, well, Brother Branham was a part of the KKK because someone in the town paid for his his surgery when he was a child. Well, he was a child. How do you think the KKK is trying to get people into their grips? What they're doing is they're acting like they're good Samaritans. They're paying for people's surgeries. They're giving to different societies for white people. And they're not doing it for black people, but they're doing it for white people. So Brother Branham as a child having that paid for, even if his parents were somehow associated, doesn't mean that he himself was associated. As you see, he holds views and preached views that were very different than the KKK's views. All right, now, the next charge is that Brother Branham was a Pentecostal before he came in contact with the Pentecostals in Mishawaka, Indiana, and that he was pastoring the Pentecostal Tabernacle there in Jeffersonville, and that Roy Davis was a Pentecostal and not a part of the Missionary Baptist Church. Furthermore, they state that Roy Davis was convicted for another number of crimes, and that it is clear he was a religious charlatan and heavily involved with the KKK, maybe even the Grand Master of it. Well, as far as looking at it from now, it's clear that Roy Davis was at first antagonistic towards Brother Branham's calling and the supernatural in his life. Then later on, he changed his tune. All right. So, but at first, Roy Davis was antagonistic to Brother Branham and made fun of Brother Branham for his ministry and calling and what the angel of the Lord spoke to him. It's clear that Roy Davis was ordaining women to ministry. Brother Branham stood against that and separated from that. Now, in the things that John Collins is putting out, he's seeking to make it seem as though Roy Davis was a mentor to and helped Brother Branham start his evangelistic ministry. Now, this is a huge stretch. Brother Branham was not helped by Roy Davis. Brother Branham was made fun of by Roy Davis. Now, the church was called a Pentecostal Baptist church. So I want you to understand, the Missionary Baptist Church was and is still a non-denominational, independent church movement that came together as independent churches to support overseas missions work. That's why it's called Missionary Baptist. As such, there's churches that could have identified as Missionary Baptist but lean towards some of the Pentecostal ways. Many of the black churches in the South that are Missionary Baptist, you would go into them and see very little difference between a Pentecostal church and a Missionary Baptist church. Now, I will admit there are details that cannot be explained as to how Brother Branham was introduced to the larger Pentecostal community or the operation of the spiritual gifts. But it is clear that Brother Branham himself, long before he came in contact with the Pentecostals, was operating the supernatural. So from the time before that, he had a miraculous ministry. He had visions. He prayed for the sick. These things were happening in his local little ministry. Roy Davis, being a charlatan, again, you cannot blame Brother Branham or put a black mark on Brother Branham because Roy Davis was a charlatan. Brother Davis was a charlatan. He was a horrible person. That's clear. But that doesn't mark Brother Branham. Brother Branham didn't receive his calling from Roy Davis. And Brother Branham's ministry, the results that it produced was not from Roy Davis. It was from a work of God. Once, in order to prove he was not a prophet, they want to associate with someone who did evil and was convicted of crimes and was dishonest. Again, this is grasping at straws. You are trying to find a reason to show Brother Branham was false, but it's a dishonest approach. It's a lying approach. Brother Branham separated himself from Roy Davis in the mid-30s and was never associated with him again. Now, you can get articles and try to find Roy Davis was involved. He was going to Brother Branham's meetings. He spoke about Brother Branham's meetings, but Brother Branham himself never hitched his horse up to Roy Davis. When he separated from Roy Davis, he was finished with Roy Davis in the 1930s, and he never associated with him again. That was a wise choice of Brother Branham. Tell me when. When did Roy Davis get involved, and was he a part of Brother Branham's leadership team? These are not the people. He was not involved. They were not involved with his advance team. They were not involved with his ministry team. He was not ever on Brother Branham's group of ministers that traveled with him and ministered with him in his early campaigns, in his middle campaigns, and his late campaigns. Anyone that's saying that or trying to imply that is lying. Brother Branham spoke of Roy Davis and referenced him from time to time, but you can see when he does that, it's all from history and it's all from a distance. Now, we have the testimony of Brother Branham that they were a Baptist, that he was a Baptist. And we would see Jesus 1957. Brother Branham says, I was a Baptist, as you know of, and I'm still a Baptist. I'm a Pentecostal Baptist now since I've received the Holy Ghost. Now, there's some confusion regarding the timing of this situation, but the dark and foreboding claims that John Collins makes in connection to these inconsistencies loses a lot of credibility when you examine it closely. Now, I can't explain why the Billy Branham Pentecostal Tabernacle was legally set up in November 1936, prior to the 1937 flood that led Brother Branham to go to the Pentecostal people. Perhaps Brother Branham himself embraced the Pentecostal message prior to the flood. I think that's clear. Brother Branham embraced it prior to the flood, but he continued to refuse to go to the field of evangelism and to preach to the Pentecostal people. He stayed there. He had a Pentecostal type gift, visions, word of knowledge, word of wisdom based on those visions, the sign of the Messiah, the sign in his hand, etc., etc. He had a Pentecostal type ministry and embraced that, right? Even though the local ministers, even Roy Davis himself, made fun of him. But Brother Branham himself refused to go to the field of evangelism. And this is the point that God was taking with Brother Branham. I'm sending you, and you're not listening to me sending you. You're not following the open doors, and you're not going forth, and I've sent you to go forward.
Sorry, I don't understand.
So now, it is possible that in 1933, Brother Branham had started his church, but that he didn't form it legally and file documents until 1936. That was also the same year he got the deed to the 8th and Penn location. In 1935, he held services as Billy Branham Pentecostal Tabernacle in the same area. The claim by some is that he didn't embrace the Pentecostal movement until 1937, but I don't think that is what Brother Branham is trying to tell us. Brother Branham is trying to tell us he refused the calling to the evangelistic field and the invitations given all over the country by the Pentecostal movement until much later when his evangelistic ministry started. In 1933, he was speaking of visions and healing and discernment. It's clear that he already embraced the prophetic ministry that was very much Pentecostal in nature. Secondly, if we look at this, Brother Branham's doctrine was very much Baptist in nature. That's true. I think that's undisputable. He taught the sovereignty of God and election. Many Baptists, Reformed Baptists, embrace this, and there's a long-standing history of that. Charles Spurgeon himself was Reformed Baptist that was a Calvinist. Brother Branham taught against women preachers. Baptists, even until this day, there's a great dispute in the Southern Baptist Church, and they've refused to allow women preachers, and disassociated churches that have allowed women preachers. He taught the independent nature of the local church. These are all markers of Baptist preaching. The Pentecostals allow women preachers. The Pentecostals have a denomination and don't keep the independence of the local church. Brother Branham's ministry continued on, and that Pentecostal aspect of the ministry continued on, and it got so frustrating and disturbing to him, since all the local ministers said, something's wrong with you, you have a devil. That's when Brother Branham went to meet the angel of the Lord and got his commission, and went to the missions field and the evangelistic field in the mid-40s. It's clear as you look closely at the way Brother Branham would speak that he was not good at timelines and being precisely accurate with dates and years. He frequently states a few years ago when it was decades ago. He spoke of the timing of various events and even got the order mixed up from time to time. Brother Branham was a man. He was subject to mistakes. He was subject to not remembering things correctly. In 1950, who is God? Brother Branham says, you got to have faith, to believe that I have told you the truth. And I would not tell you unless first I knowed it was the truth. And I'm sure, though, me being a man and subject to mistakes, that God is infallible and can't make a mistake. In Do You Now Believe in 1953, he says, if I would say it, it could be a lie because I'm subject to any mistakes, lies, anything else like anybody else. 1956, Brother Branham says, I'm just a sinner saved by his grace, is subject to all kinds of mistakes and ups and downs. Oh my, everything wrong with me, but there's nothing wrong with him. Spirit of Truth, 1963, I don't have to do it. I'm a mortal, subject to mistakes. He is immortal, infallible. He has to keep his. See? In Blind Bartimaeus, 1957, Brother Branham says, proves God just reveals to his prophets that what he wants them to know, nothing else. Prophets are not infallible people. Prophets are not angels, they are men. In Questions and Answers, 1961, and these answers are not infallible, see, because the scriptures is infallible, and as far as I know, they're lined with the scriptures. I hope that makes it plain, and the tape is going to be kept now, and anyone that would want it, well, they could have it. But now, I know the scriptures are infallible, but my answers are not infallible. So I'm sure everyone understands that, and if it's not infallible, then you have a right to maybe to ask me at any time. 1963, calling Jesus on the scene. If I make mistakes, you pray for me. I'm not infallible. I'm your brother. The second miracle, 1951. I want you to listen to me. The last 2 nights I'll say this. I believe, may God help me not to exaggerate, but just to be honest, as I believe from my heart, from the pull of the strength that's taken me from this meeting, there's at least 200 people sitting here right now that's already healed. In Straight as the Gate, 1959. I'm not very good at making or estimating crowds because I usually exaggerate on it. But the first night, I'd say we have about 1,200 people out because it was just known one day. And the next day, they started runners running for miles on relay up the mountains. One runner would run for hours. For 4 hours, they let some other runner go on up the mountain. The second night, there was about 5,000. Third night, it was estimated around 15,000, maybe 20. And there were thousands times thousands came to the Lord. So as we see and look at what Brother Branham said, he could have mixed up his timeline, had it mixed up. As time went on, he could even exaggerate the length of the connection with the Baptists and the timing of his connection with the Pentecostals. These things do not take away from the truth of his ministry and the supernatural vindication that God brought upon his ministry, or the fact that his teaching is scriptural and has been stood for by God. Number one, Brother Branham is not a computer. God is not expecting every prophet to be a computer. When you're speaking and telling testimonies, the point is the testimony and the supernatural power of God. The point isn't the precision of the timeline and the exact dates. The point is what God has done. And so then you get people who are detractors and hate the message and hate what God is doing, and they want to poke holes in the timeline. Well, I think they're missing the point. As I said, they're missing the point. The point isn't Brother Branham didn't embrace the Pentecostal movement. The point is Brother Branham refused to go the evangelistic field. That's what point Brother Branham was trying to make through all of that. All right, now I want to show and reveal that the Bible itself reveals the mistakes of all the prophets. The Bible doesn't hide the mistakes of the prophets. When the prophets came with the word of the Lord, God vindicated that. God worked supernaturally through the arm of flesh. And the arm of flesh is full of mistakes, but God's supernatural work is not. Let's look at David. David had a prophetic ministry in the Psalms and been referred to as a prophet. He'd foretold many events. It's clear David was not infallible, made a number of deadly mistakes that cost people their lives, think of the level of betrayal that David had against Uriah. I mean, horrible. God's not sorry to be identified with David. God's not upset to be identified with David. God calls David a man after his own heart. David repented. God loved David. His very name means beloved. Abraham was God's prophet. He lied to Pharaoh. He lied to Abimelech. God even directed those men affected to ask him to pray for them so that they would be healed. It's incredible. Elijah, after the Mount Carmel showdown, ran and hid for fear from his queen Jezebel. Jeremiah repeatedly sought to quit his ministry and not speak any more in the name of the Lord. Multiple times says, I will not speak in the name of the Lord anymore. And the Lord has to correct him, and he comes back. John the Baptist introduced the Messiah and then turned around, went to prison, asked him, are you the Messiah, or should we look for someone else? My goodness, what a mistake. What an inconsistency. Should we disregard now John the Baptist? Peter was anointed with the Holy Ghost, preached the gospel at the day of Pentecost, was the apostle to the Jews. Peter went and ate with Gentiles, and then when the Jews came from James, he removed himself, quit eating with them. What a hypocrite. Paul calls him out as a hypocrite. Should we disregard Peter, throw his epistles out of the Bible? No, of course not. Noah was a prophet. After the flood, he became drunk. He was a drunk after the flood. Should we disregard Noah's prophecy? Well, no. Noah's prophecy came to pass. Noah was a prophet. But he wasn't infallible. Again, exactly as Brother Branham said. God's prophets aren't infallible, but when the word of the Lord comes to them and the supernatural power of God works through them, that's the infallible God working. Moses, through anger, struck the rock twice instead of speaking to it and glorified himself. I mean, think about that. He glorified himself instead of God. God didn't back up and say, whoa, I have to start over again. Moses isn't a prophet. He simply rebuked Moses and gave Moses the consequences of his actions. You're kept out of the promised land. Again, that's Brother Branham. Same thing. It's clear though the prophets were sinners, they were not infallible, but when they brought forth, thus saith the Lord, it was the word of the Lord coming through them to us for you and I. That's for us. Should not be a surprise to us that Brother Branham made mistakes and had some inconsistencies due to the fact that he is a man. Well, I'm going to close there. I'm going to stop there for this time. We're going to continue on with this subject. This will be a matter of study and prayer. You pray for me. I want to make sure to cover this carefully and help people understand the truth of this message and rightly divide it so that they're not stumbled by the lies that are being told to hinder people's faith. So God bless you. Please, once again, I ask you to, if you're watching on YouTube, subscribe, like, comment. If you're watching on Facebook, share this, comment, like it. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, please give us a rating and give us your honest review. If you have any questions, prayer requests, or testimonies for me, feel free to write to me at jasondemars.com. That's the best way to do so. Otherwise, you can comment on the video on YouTube or Facebook. We certainly appreciate that. May the Lord richly bless you. Thank you for listening to Equipping the Bride podcast. New episodes are posted every Friday. I want to remind you that if you have any questions, testimonies, or prayer requests, please let me know at jasondemars.com. I also have free books and tracts available at my website, and shipping is free as well. Please, I ask you to remember the believers and the missions work in the Middle East in prayer. May the Lord richly bless you.